see. I look at you and tell you what I feel. Look at me and tell me what you see. I look at you and tell you what I feel.
Well, hello there, boils and ghouls.
We'll get to you. This is my show, goddammit. Welcome back. Today, I shall be finally getting to my Patreon requests with Demon Night, or more specifically called Tales from the Crypt Demon Night. However, much like those said tales which emerge from that said crypt, this film has a rather messy story. Demon Night was originally intended to be the second part of a trilogy. Much like the TV show, the films were going to be separate stories. However, due to the studio thinking Demon Night was the most Tales-like film, it got to be front and centre instead. And the original stories that would have been part of that trilogy never materialised. Instead, we got a sequel, Bordello of Blood, which connected slightly to this film as a plot-important item shows up. And then Ritual, that gave up on the connection altogether. None of these were ever considered much good, with Bordello of Blood being the least liked out of all of them. However, I'm sure most people feel that Tales from the Crypt was never meant to be anything more than schlocky nonsense anyway. So, let's find out. Take it away, Crypty.
I call this one Demon Night.
We start out with a bloody woman. And I don't mean bloody woman, I mean a woman covered in blood, as she brags to her accomplice about how she successfully murdered her husband, who's currently melting in acid. However, while she takes a bath, with over-the-top moaning and gratuitous tit shots, her husband makes a surprise comeback. This really doesn't seem very Demon Night-like to me. Am I missing something here? Her husband has arrived to return her axe when... Oh, you. Yes, this isn't really the film, but the set-up preamble before it, with the Crypt Keeper, played by the ever-fantastic John Casilla, directing some random horror movie. And I can't say I find his film particularly compelling. But hey, neither does the Crypt Keeper, as he berates an uncredited John Larroquette for his lack of acting.
What the hell would they dig this guy up?
Ugh, it's Tales from the Crypt. Those kind of jokes come with the territory, unfortunately. Also, it's quite clever how they got the effect of the Crypt Keeper walking about. It's just a case of them superimposing the mannequin's head onto the body of an actor. Simple, but effective. Gives him more presence in the scene than the dummy would provide on its own. But anyway, Crypty has already introduced it. Let's finally get to the film proper, shall we? And despite the film giving us the traditional comic book opening, this story, unlike the episodes of the TV series, is not taken from the comics at all. That's not a statement of or against its quality, just an observation, because it still feels like a tale story. Anyway, we meet our main character, and I guess Demon Knight extraordinaire, Breaker, played by William Sadler, and he is being chased by Billy Zane's The Collector. No, not that one. Thank God. Ugh. And I know I'm jumping the gun on this one, but Billy Zane seriously kills it in this film. Even better than Rich Arsehole from Titanic. And it's one of those roles where you can just tell that the actor loves it, and it fits perfectly too. I do believe this character wouldn't be anywhere near as good with a different actor. While Breaker and the Collector drive after each other, it's clear the chase has gone on for a while, as Breaker's car runs out of fuel. So he pulls over and starts firing, managing to set the car on fire. Which honestly doesn't seem to perturb the Collector at all, who just keeps on driving, forcing Breaker to jump out of the way of the subsequent wreckage. This is a great example of a film in media res because it gets rid of all the setup, it gets right into the action, and the crucial part of that is that we will learn who these two characters are and what their agenda is throughout the film. Breaker manages to escape unscathed, and that's when we see his palm, which has 7 star tattoos on it. 3 of them are glowing, with 1 moving into a circle. I'm fairly sure they're not normal tattoos. Breaker finds his way to a town called Wormwood. Now, normally, I would assume that that name was chosen simply because the filmmakers thought it sounded cool. However, we'll find out this film is overtly steeped in Christian mythology, so it makes sense for the name to be a reference to the Bible and Revelations 8:10. The third angel sounded his trumpet, and a great star, blazing like a torch, fell from the sky on a third of the rivers and on the springs of water. The name of the star is Wormwood. Basically, it's all part of the apocalypse. It's clear that Breaker has learned to distrust other people, because instead of asking for assistance or even interacting with anyone, he tries stealing a car. Obviously, he's immediately rumbled by a kid who calls for his father, forcing Breaker to make a run for it. Fortunately, he manages to run into a drunk Dick Miller. Why did Dick Miller become the stereotypical drunk in monster movies? That's quite the specific niche he's landed in. But hey, at least we know who can play Zadok Allen if they ever do a Shadow over Innsmouth movie. Meanwhile, cops have arrived at the scene of the crash, with the Collector showing up, and despite the cops wanting answers to their questions, he manages to charm them into working with him to find Breaker. That's always a very interesting trope to me, because when there's a clear good guy and bad guy in a film, not always, but a lot of the time, it's the bad guy who's the more charming one and convinces other people of his innocence. Perhaps that says something about the seductiveness of evil, the temptation of Eve, perhaps. Or it's just convenient for the plot. Back with Breaker, the drunk, Uncle Willie as he's called, takes Breaker to a sort of bar/hotel/knocking shops, where he can get food and sleep. And that's when Breaker's tattoo on his hand all align to form a circle, signifying something, but we're going to have to wait for that one. We start to meet our kooky cast of characters: Cordelia, the resident prostitute, and disgruntled owner, Irene. And it's clear the business isn't doing too well.
I never rent short term, and I don't rent to strangers.
Well, there's your goddamn problem. What kind of hotel doesn't rent to strangers? No wonder the place is on its arse. Fortunately, Breaker's wad of cash changes her mind on that rule. We also meet work-release convict Geraldine, played by Jada Pinkett, before she added the Smith to the end of her name. And for some reason, there seems to be some kind of instant connection between her and Breaker, but don't worry, there isn't a forced romantic subplot. Breaker is shown to his room, and downstairs, the characters continue rolling in, with Wally, postal worker, and former Roger Rabbit, who's completely entranced with Cordelia, which will only cause problems later. Wally was also fired from the post office, and he clearly has issues with his former boss, which will have a nice reveal later on in the film. The cops are on the way, with the Collector talking about Breaker, but not revealing much information other than him stealing something very valuable. That's when they get the call about Breaker's attempted car theft, speeding off. At the hotel, Breaker is eating, with Cordelia proposing that she be dessert. And one thing I can never really say against Tales from the Crypt, apart from the deliberately terrible puns, the comedy is always pretty much part of it. Not all of them land, but it's still pretty good. This film is no different.
God damn it. Get that pussy off the table. I meant the cat.
See? Can't knock that. To make things worse for Breaker, the guy who was at the diner when he tried to steal the car shows up at the hotel, casting suspicion on Breaker when he tells them what happened, with Irene calling the cops on him. The cops get the call from the station, and I'm not sure if it was intended, but there's a subtle hint at the Collector's supernatural nature, as he's seen talking to people as the cops walk away, but is then suddenly behind the cop. The scene didn't cut, despite my crash edits, and I guess the Collector could have just walked around the camera, which I'm sure is what Billy Zane did. But it's a nice little effect that suggests that something is going on here. Intentional or not, I really like it. Eventually the cops with the Collector show up at the hotel, and Breaker goes immediately on the defensive, holding Geraldine at knife point, ordering the cops to drop their guns. The Collector's confident he won't harm Geraldine, and yeah, Breaker reluctantly surrenders the knife. And as he's handcuffed, the cops can't find the item Breaker supposedly stole, which is an antique in the shape of a key. The Collector knows he's stashed it somewhere, with everyone more than happy to help him find it. Which must be so infuriating for Breaker and the audience to see these people, who aren't necessarily bad people, doing bad things. They've just been convinced by the real bad guy here. It shows how dangerous he really is, because he is so charming and convincing, getting people to work against their own self-interests. At least he'll have a job in politics after this. Oh, but of course, we'll also see how physically dangerous he is too. The cops have found that the person Breaker's pretending to be died years ago, giving them even less of a reason to trust him. But unfortunately, that's when Willie finds the key. And things start to be explained as the key has the same stars that Breaker has on his hand, meaning they're connected. The Collector wants Willie to place the key in his little suitcase, yet he also needs him to pour out the red liquid that's inside of it too. Breaker tries to tell Willie what the collector is, but it's the cops who stop everything, taking the key for evidence. Up until now, the collector has been civil to the cops. However, that all changes when they want to take him with Breaker into the station for the cars they both stole and destroyed. Yeah, looks like he's done being civil now. Although I have to say, it's not exactly the most strategic thing he could have done. I mean, up until that point, everyone was pretty much on his side. It would have been better if he had a bit more of a stealthy approach, to say the least. Breaker frees himself and gets his hands on the key, and we also see why the collector wanted Willie to handle it, as Breaker burns his face with the key, forcing him to run off out of the window. Breaking character pretty much immediately.
Fuck this cowboy shit! You fucking hold dunk, po dunk, well then there, motherfuckers!
And also channeling the spirit of Beetlejuice, apparently. And now the siege begins as the collector cuts his palm and throws his blood about. And you know, whether it be the blood of the Predator, Herbert West's reagent, or this guy's blood, glow stick fluid has come in very handy for movies, I must say. And from the collector's blood, he spawns demons to do his bidding. And holy shit, Dick Miller is getting some serious Gremlins flashbacks right about now. But fortunately, Breaker isn't without his own tricks up his sleeve. When the demons attack, first, he has his crack shot aimed to shoot accurately into the demon's eyes to kill them, but also he has the key, that he uses the red liquid inside to form a barrier on doors and windows, keeping the demons at bay. But naturally, there's always one idiot, and of course, it's the appropriately named Roach, as he gets Cordelia to follow him outside, getting inevitably ambushed. Roach returns inside, but not before pushing past Cordelia, who's grabbed by a demon. Wally rushes to save her, and his first shots don't harm the demons at all, but Breaker tells him to aim for the eyes. He kills the demon, but the energy hits Wally in the chest, knocking him out. There's a lot of lore being revealed right now, and I really enjoy it when a film makes the effort to add stuff to the story that's not necessarily needed, but just fleshes out the world, like the demon's weak spots being their eyes. I couldn't find a biblical reason for that, but it's interesting. And of course, the way the key is being used. How and why will be expanded upon throughout the film. Breaker gives everyone the lowdown on the creatures and reveals that the liquid in the key is actually blood. Roach still hasn't learned and thinks that he can give the collector the key and they'll leave them alone. Obviously, that's a stupid idea. Breaker makes sure and secures the rest of the doors and windows, and we then get some backstory as he sees a cross on a window, flashing him all the way back to the crucifixion. Breaker's not there though, so I'm not quite sure how he knows what happened, but we see a man beneath the crucified Christ offering the key to a demon. God subsequently bitch slaps him with a bolt of lightning though. Which certainly begs the question that if the key is so important, why isn't God flinging those lightning bolts every which way to keep it safe? It kind of shows the inherent problem with using a Deus Ex Machina, literally in this case, because once you use it, you question why it's not used all the time. While Irene loads her shotgun, the previously missing cat finds its way back in. However, according to Breaker, animals can be possessed just like humans, so it might not be safe, as it runs off, forcing Breaker to chase after it into the basement. Elsewhere, Roach is busy making sure he's the one we give the least bit of a shit about, as he first tries to have Wally help him get the key, and then he slaps Cordelia to really hammer home how much of a douchebag he is. But anyway, in the basement, the cat is found, and using the key, they find that it's safe. However, because of the cat, they discover a hidden mine shaft they can use to escape. Back with Cordelia, who's crying, she's approached by the collector. Well, she's approached mentally anyway, and he stands at her window, basically whispering sweet nothings in her ear as he tries to get her to let him in. I feel like that's quite the failing on Breaker's part, that he didn't prevent this from happening. He knows what the collector is capable of, so if he just kept everyone together, this wouldn't have happened. I mean, you could argue that he's just one guy and can't be everywhere, but still, could have mentioned it at least. However, when Wally enters the room, Cordelia doesn't seem to be affected, at least not yet. Back in the basement, Breaker is unwilling to risk the use of the mine shaft, preferring to wait till sunup instead, which isn't really a solution. That's when Wally is heard screaming as Cordelia has gone full-on Pazuzu. Breaker loses the key, and Irene tries to use it, but just has her arm torn off by Cordelia. Breaker does blow her head off, but he still has to destroy the eyes that flew out of her head to kill her. In the aftermath, surprisingly, Irene is alive, and everyone is keen to use the mines to escape, with Roach still wanting to give the key. Breaker threatening him with a gun is enough to convince him otherwise for now, and they all work to get the mine shaft open. And the hammering of the wood gives Breaker another flashback to the crucifixion, and we find out that the blood in the key is not just any blood, but it's the blood of Christ. So technically, wouldn't that make the key a really fancy and elaborate wine hip flask? Ain't gonna lie, I really want one of those now. Anyway, they manage to break through to the mine, with Breaker reluctantly following and setting up another barrier behind him. While wandering the mines, Geraldine comes across the kid from the start hiding there, whose reason becomes clear when his parents soon appear, now possessed, forcing everyone back to the hotel. The demons are stopped by the barrier, however Roach is there to fuck things up, as he shoots and kills one of the demons, which the released energy destroys the barrier, forcing them to run again upstairs. However, fortunately, when the key was dropped earlier, it created a barrier at the top of the stairs. While everyone recuperates, Breaker flashes back to an event he was actually present at, all the way back to World War I. We see him fighting demons in the trenches, where Breaker's predecessor places his own blood in the key and passes the torch to him before dying. This stuff is by far my favourite of the film, and let's be honest, plenty of prequel material too. I would love to see Breaker through time, fighting demons and potentially the Collector through World War I and II and other conflicts. I'm surprised and disappointed that didn't happen. Also, when Breaker receives the key, he sees the entire history of it, nicely explaining why he knows of events he wasn't present at. Also, this is how he got the tattoos on his hand. Speaking of remembering things oddly, Roach has a strange recollection of events.
And you got us into this mess. What the hell are you gonna do to get us out of it?
No, I think you'll find you're the asshole that got them into this specific situation. But now is when Breaker explains the situation. The tattoos on his hand pretty much are an indication of when he's due to pass the torch of the key. He stayed at the hotel because there weren't 7 people. However, when more people showed up, he refers to it like tumblers in a lock. So I assume the stars are like a prophecy that the person holding the key needs to fulfill in order to pass the key on. Which is honestly kind of depressing, considering they're not there to actually change anything, just to continue the cycle. But once Breaker starts giving info, he won't stop, as he explains that God created the earth out of darkness, but the demons in that darkness had 7 keys which gave them power. However, in the moment of "let there be light," it scattered the demons and the keys. The demons hold 6 of the keys, and the one Breaker has is the only one left holding them at bay. The more I hear about this film's lore, the more I think about how it needs spin-offs and sequels and prequels, because there's so much good stuff there. Breaker mentions how the other 6 keys went to different planets and dimensions and times. My mind boggles at the possibilities. Hell, if no one's going to write it, I'll write it for God's sake. Also, the blood in the key kind of has that broom paradox issue. You know the broom paradox, or the ship of Theseus if you need a more highbrow reference. If you have a broom and replace the head of that broom, and then sometime later replace the handle, is it still fundamentally the same broom? Well, the key is similar, because although the blood in it was originally Christ's blood, over the centuries it's been topped up over and over, so is it even the same blood anymore? And after the history lesson, Roach surprisingly apologises to Breaker. It won't last long though, don't worry about that. Geraldine notices that the kid has now gone missing, and in the confusion, Roach steals the key. Wow, that really didn't take long at all, did it? Also, he must either be a complete idiot, or just an evil arsehole at this point, if he still wants to give the key over after knowing what it means. Because yeah, even if they do let everyone go after they get the key, the world's still gonna end. As everyone starts looking for the kid, it becomes clear that the Collector is dividing and conquering, as he changes Geraldine's surroundings to manipulate her into helping him, showing her a vision of Breaker with demons rummaging around in his insides. The Collector promises her immortality, but she spits in his face, so he tries mind control, which we don't know at this point if it worked. Irene and the cop manage to find Willie drinking with the kid, who as a nice touch is reading a Tales from the Crypt comic. Irene gets Willie to take the kid back downstairs, and for some reason, instead of finding Breaker on the landing, he decides to go into a random room. That's a bit contrived to say the least. It's not like Breaker's difficult to find. Also, they've established that the Collector can, or at least appear, to change surroundings, so they should have just done that. And I know that's a little thing to point out, but it's these little things that niggle at me. The Collector then tries again to get help, showing Willie naked women and booze. and I'm pretty sure Willie accepting a drink is him handing over control and becoming possessed. And at the same time, the setup of Wally being fired from the post office pays off, as Irene and the cop find that he's been stealing mail and stockpiling weapons and a shit ton of grenades, meaning he was going to go on a shooting spree. Which was an epidemic at the time this film was made. Aren't we glad that doesn't happen anymore? And yeah, Breaker and Geraldine find the now possessed Willie. Oh, before that fight though, I have to mention a badass moment from Irene when the Collector shows up, offering to give her arm back.
Is that a yes?
No, that's me giving you the finger, asshole.
See? Badass. Breaker continues to struggle with Willie, and while he does, Roach offers the key to the Collector. Breaker manages to cut the guy's head off, which, as we've established, doesn't stop him, with the kid surprisingly being the one to impale the head on some antlers, killing him. Back with Roach, he pretty much agrees to let the demons kill everyone but him for the key. Again, complete arsehole and idiot. But first, the Collector needs the barrier removed. Have I mentioned how much I enjoy this character, and how obvious it is that Billy Zane is just having so much fun with it? It's a shame that the character hasn't really permeated into popular culture. It's a great villain with both funny and menacing moments. But I think that's because he doesn't really have anything more iconic to stand out for people to recognise. He's just a guy, unfortunately. It's sad to say that people remember Billy Zane as that one bully in Back to the Future more than they do this guy. So yeah, Roach hands the key over, placing it in the case. But of course, once Roach gets downstairs, the Collector goes back on his deal and has the demons kill him. Meh, no big loss. The thing I'm more concerned with is the rather glaring amount of contrived writing that just occurred. Mainly because, if you remember near the start of the film where the Collector tries to get Willie to put the key in the case, he makes sure and asks Willie to pour out the blood as well. However, here, he doesn't do that, even though there's no reason why he would forget. The only reason he doesn't do that is because if he did, then that's game over. So, it's not a big plot hole, but it is fairly significant. The Collector, with his demons, start looking for the people left. He used to be a collector, but then he took an arrow to the... So yeah, after that arrow, Breaker easily takes the key back, running off. The cop does a good job at taking out some of the demons, and with the help of Irene and a shit ton of grenades, they're able to finish them off. But of course, the Collector's not finished yet, as the comic the kid is reading suddenly comes alive, fixing his gaze, and while that goes on, Breaker finds that they only have enough blood for one more barrier, Geraldine choosing to use it on one of the windows. However, that connection we've seen between Geraldine and Breaker is explained, as he pours the remaining blood onto her hand, which she uses to set up a barrier. But Breaker is passing the torch onto her, because out of the 7 people, she's the only one left, making her a chosen one. However, before Breaker can pass the key on, the kid attacks. They fight, and in a really nice link to the comic, we see what happens reflected in the comic panels the kid was reading. And the kid mortally wounds Breaker, who drops the key as a distraction, and when the kid goes to pick it up, Geraldine kicks him through the window barrier, killing him. I feel like that was a nice nod to the fact that Geraldine is a good choice for Breaker's replacement, because up until now, she hasn't killed or even attacked a demon. So it's a great way of showing that before she wasn't ready, but she is now. And Breaker seems to think so too, as he gets her to fill the key with his blood. But considering the key was empty, I doubt there's any of Jesus' blood in there now. But I think that's the point, because when Breaker talks about the crucifixion, he mentions that the holder of the key took the blood of a carpenter to fill it, not even mentioning Jesus by name. So it's not the fact that Jesus is holy, that's why the key is holy. It's more the idea that the giving of life, the giving of blood, is what gives it power, which is an idea I can get behind. The process is finished when Breaker places the key in her hand, giving her the visions and the tattoo before dying. Unfortunately, Geraldine still has to deal with the Collector, and now all the seals that were in the place are broken as the Collector pops up from the floorboards. And rather cleverly, Geraldine has covered herself in Breaker's blood so she burns the Collector when she touches him, who slinks away again. That advantage doesn't last long though, as he uses a shower curtain to get her into the shower to wash the blood off. Which is honestly a shame, because I would have liked to have seen that kind of clever use of the blood more, instead of just used once and then thrown away. However, to really emphasise Geraldine's resourcefulness, Geraldine stabs the collector in the eye, and while he's reeling, she takes some of the blood in her mouth. He then drags her into the other room, and then channels Beetlejuice again in his dance routine with her. Oh, and to add to the goofiness of the character, he literally spits fire from his flies. You hear it unzip and everything. Maybe this character's jumping the shark just a little bit, because it's really stupid. And to make things really awkward, the collector claims to love Geraldine, which I hope is just a ruse. Especially when he tries but is unable to say the word love. It's just silly at this point. Fortunately, probably to save the embarrassment, Geraldine, in a nice callback to when she spat in his face before, spits the blood out into the collector's face, as he's engulfed in fire. He gets a big transformation scene, but then just explodes, killing him. Geraldine is able to replace the blood in the key though, Breaker's still got a bit left, and we end with her taking a bus, cleverly sealing the bus's door, which was needed, as a new collector has arrived, but decides against taking this bus, humming the Tales from the Crypt theme as he walks down the road. So that was Demon Knight. Oh wait, hold on, we got the Crypt Keeper to do his shit. Yeah, basically the Crypt Keeper goes to his movie premiere, and I guess because he was such a shitty director, he ends up getting decapitated. Which doesn't seem to bother him much anyway.
Now that's entertainment!
Okay, now that's the end. Right. That was Demon Knight. And despite its admitted flaws, it's actually an absolutely fantastic film. Everything about Demon Knight is very well done, from the acting of William Sadler and Billy Zane, who plays a brilliant villain, to the story, which is just filled with so much lore that you can pick through, but also deliberately leaves holes that people can and should discuss. Although the annoying bit about Demon Knight is it starts the trilogy far too strongly, as the other films are nowhere near as good. Really, it might have been better to have this as a second of the trilogy. And yeah, I do believe this film deserves way more admiration in popular culture, and I'm really glad I got to review it. Thank you to Lindsay, who very kindly donated to the Patreon page and requested this film. Seriously, it's so my kind of thing. And if you would like to donate to the Patreon page, there will be a link in the description. It's not mandatory, but it will certainly help the channel. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.